The tragic stories of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims who died at the hands of the Milwaukee cannibal. From 1978 to 1991, serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer tortured and murdered 17 young men and boys. Here are their forgotten stories. Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most notorious serial killers of all time. Beginning in 1978, the Milwaukee Monster butchered at least 17 young men and boys. He even cannibalized some of them. And his heinous crimes continued until he was finally caught in 1991. But though his story is well known around the world, less is known about Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. They were all young, ranging in age from 14 to 32. Many of them were gay ethnic minorities, and nearly all of them were impoverished and extremely vulnerable. Some of them dreamt of appearing on stage or in magazines. Others simply wanted to have a fun night out with their friends, but tragically, they all had the misfortune to cross Jeffrey Dahmer's path. Dahmer's first victim. Jeffrey Dahmer was driving down the road in Bath Township, OH, when he pulled up alongside 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, a hippie rocker the same age as him, who happened to be hitchhiking to a concert. After talking for a few minutes, Jeffrey invited him to come back to his place to drink some beer, smoke some weed, and listen to records for a few hours. Stephen accepted, probably tired of wandering the road and thinking it sounded like a good time. He loaded himself into the passenger seat and off the boys went. After an afternoon spent getting drunk and high together, the substances eventually ran out, as they always do, and Stephen stated that he needed to be back on his way. This caused a flip to switch inside of Jeffrey's head. To keep his new friend from abandoning him, an inebriated Jeff knocked Stephen unconscious with a 10 pounds barbell weight just as the boy was bending down to pick up his jacket. Jeffrey decided this wasn't good enough for him, or perhaps not permanent enough, so he knelt down next to Stephen's body and pressed the barbell weight into his throat until he had been strangled to death. He cut the boy into pieces and shoved it all into black trash bags, piling the remains in his car. That night, he began driving the evidence of what he'd done to a local dump site. A police officer observed Jeffrey weaving over the center line of the road and proceeded to pull him over, asking him what he had in the bags and why he was out so late. Jeff explained by saying the bags were full of grass clippings, and that he had been troubled by his parents' recent divorce and thought driving the trash out to the dump would take his mind off of it. He managed to pass the field sobriety test, and the cop unknowingly let a murderer carrying the body parts of a young man go free. Shaken by the encounter, Jeffrey aborted the plan and instead drove back home and buried the bags underneath his house. Rest in peace, Stephen Hicks. Dahmer met Twomey at a gay bar called Club 219 on the night of September 15, 1987. Twomey's shift as a restaurant worker had come to an end, so he decided to go out for some fun. Jeffrey thoroughly charmed the 25-year-old and invited him to spend the night with him in his room at the Ambassador Hotel nearby. They went back to room number 507, where they got blackout drunk. The next morning, Dahmer had no memory of the night before due to his drunken stupor, but found Twomey hanging halfway off of the bed with his chest brutally beaten in and blood seeping from his mouth. Dahmer left immediately to buy the largest suitcase he could find, and he crammed Twomey's body into it. Jeffrey, rather boldly, had the bellboy carry the heavy thing out to his cab for him. En route back to his grandmother's house where he now lived, the cab driver made a comment about the nauseating odor emanating from the suitcase, which Jeffrey calmly brushed off. He let Twomey's body rot for a week before dismembering him in the basement and destroying the remains. He was never charged for the murder of Stephen Twomey because Stephen's body, or any other physical evidence, was never found. The sentencing judge refused to charge him without anything proving beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. Additionally, Jeffrey held no technical memory of committing the crime. He stated that he probably did it, but he also offered the suggestion in a pathetic attempt to swerve responsibility, that Stephen had killed himself. Rest in peace, Stephen Twomey. Dahmer murdered 14-year-old Jamie Dockstader on January 16, 1988. Jamie was hanging around outside of the popular gay bar Club 219, from where Dahmer also lured Stephen Twomey, unable to get inside due to him being a minor. He was known to frequently spend time around the club in search of romantic partners. Jeffrey obviously decided it would be easier to lure a child from the street than to lure a man away from friends and atmosphere, so he offered Jamie $50 to make a video with him at his house. Together they went back to Jeffrey's grandmother's house where Dahmer drugged him, strangled him, and kept his body wrapped in a blanket in the wine cellar. For 1 week, poor Jamie's little body was left alone to rot on the floor. He then stripped the boy of his flesh, dissolved it, and crushed his bones using a sledgehammer. He threw out plastic bags containing the remains for the garbage truck to take to a dump site. Rest in peace, little Jamie Dockstader. Dahmer came across Richard Guerrero, 23, on the evening of March 24, 1988 and offered him $50 to make a video with him at his place. Guerrero only had $3 to his name, so he agreed to Jeffrey's offer, probably grateful for the money. Dahmer drugged, strangled, and sexually assaulted Guerrero before dissolving his body using an acid solution and flushing the consistency down the toilet. After Dahmer's final arrest, Richard's sister, Janie Hagan, broke America's heart by pleading, "I want to know what he did with my brother. I heard on the news that maybe my brother had been flushed down the toilet, I want to know." She would never get an answer, because Jeffrey never told her and the boy's remains were never discovered. Rest in peace, Richard Guerrero. K-Sun Synthesumphone was a 13-year-old boy that Jeffrey lured into his first apartment less than 24 hours after moving in. K-Sun was drugged and molested, but managed to escape and quickly found police. Jeffrey was charged with sexual assault and enticing a child for immoral purposes, spending 1 week in jail before posting bail. He was sentenced 4 months later, pleading for mercy by stating that he was an alcoholic and a homosexual with sexual problems, and offered the transparent excuse that he thought K-Sun was 19 years old. He received a light term of 5 years probation and 1 year in a workers' release program, forcing him to move out of his new apartment. Mr. and Mrs. Synthesumphone were promised that the man who traumatized their son would be locked away for a long time, so they chose not to take the case to court. They never found out what Jeffrey looked like, leaving K-Sun the only person in the family that would be able to identify him. On March 25, 1989, Easter Sunday, while Jeffrey was a free man awaiting trial for sexually assaulting 13-year-old K-Sun Synthesumphone, he went on the hunt once again at La Cage aux Falls, a local gay bar. Here he met an aspiring model, a 26-year-old named Anthony Sears, and successfully conned him into coming home with him. Jeff knew the police were probably keeping tabs on his apartment while he awaited trial, so Anthony had a friend, Jeff Connors, drive the pair to Dahmer's grandmother's house where he dropped them off. Not before reminding Anthony that he was meant to have lunch with his mother the next day and to call if he needed a ride. Dahmer then escorted Anthony inside where he drugged, strangled, and dismembered him. Dahmer admittedly found Sears to be exceptionally attractive, even scalping him because he loved his ponytail. He was truly mesmerized with Anthony, so much so that he took his skull to work with him a few days after so that he could take breaks throughout his shift to gaze at it. He later said, "If I could have kept him longer, all of him, I would have." 3 years later, investigators found Anthony's skull, mummified scalp, and preserved penis inside of apartment 213. Rest in peace, Anthony Sears. On May 20, 1990, 2 weeks after moving into the now famous apartment 213 at the Oxford apartment complex, Dahmer approached 33-year-old Raymond Smith, also known as Ricky Beeks, at Club 219. Per his usual, Dahmer offered him money to come home with him to drink and take nude photographs, where he then drugged Raymond, strangled him, and had oral sex with his corpse. Dahmer then dismembered the man, placing his severed head in the refrigerator afterwards and dissolving his body in acid. He used Smith's bones as decor throughout his hellish apartment. Dahmer later stated that Raymond's was the first corpse he had sex with. Rest in peace, Raymond Smith. Eddie Smith, 36, deemed chic by his friends, was the life of the party everywhere he went, a fun-loving, kind-hearted man. He was what you might call friends with Dahmer, before subsequently becoming his victim. He'd hung out with Jeffrey at his apartment on multiple occasions, always having a great time. On the evening of June 14, 1990, Eddie left a Milwaukee joint called the Phoenix Bar and met with Dahmer sometime just after that. On this particular visit, Jeffrey gave him a glass of liquor spiked with strong sedatives and he soon fell unconscious. From there, Dahmer strangled his friend to death before cutting the flesh from his bones with a knife and dissolving his body in the 57-gallon drum of muriatic acid. He used Eddie's bones as decor throughout his apartment, as he often did with his victims. During Jeff's trial, a relative of Eddie's mourned, "All Edward Smith wanted was to be Dahmer's friend." Rest in peace, Eddie Smith.